I want to introduce everyone to Susan Carter, who's going to be moderating our panel today. She'll go ahead and introduce all of our panelists as well. Susan's been, as I mentioned before, really crucial in developing service learning at Marylhurst and such a great asset to the Service Advisory Committee and a wonderful help to me and in my own professional development. And it's just really great to work with her, and I'm proud to introduce her.
Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. It is such a pleasure to be here today, and we have many years of service learning support and administration sitting here and teaching, sitting here in our panel today. So I would like to just introduce each person. I'm going to stand up to do that so I can read your names so I don't mess them up. We have Michael J. Hampton and Jessica Lamb, Scott Ferguson, and Greg Dardis. And again, as Amanda said, I'm Susan Carter. And we are going to give each of these people an opportunity to tell you a little bit about what they do with service learning, if they are teaching it, if they are directing programs, and they all bring a wealth of experience. So I'd like to start by introducing Michael Hampton. And this is a guy that's been all over the place. His bio is so interesting, and I wish I had time to read all of it, but I'm just going to give you some of the broad strokes. Michael is currently the Director of Service Learning and Career Development at Western Oregon University. And he's been doing this for the last 6 years, and over those years, he has been building a program that now includes national and international alternative break and service learning trips on an annual basis. So that's pretty exciting. I'm interested to learn about that. What's also interesting to me is he grew up in Portland, so he's a Portlander. And he, like myself, grew up berry picking as a younger person. In Michael's case, it was on his grandfather's blueberry farm, and he studied the relationship then between culture and ecology at Portland State's Graduate School of Education. Something else we do have in common, we've both been to Tonga. And there probably aren't very many people in the room that have been to the Kingdom of Tonga, although I was just there for several weeks, and you were there for several years. So that's quite interesting. So Michael, if you would please share your experience with us, and we're going to try to keep things to somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 minutes.
Okay, thank you. And I do want to clarify, I think the last part of that probably connects with Scott. Is that your story in terms of the Tongan piece? Or, okay, I did berry pick. but have not been to Tonga yet. I'm going to Tanzania in July. No problem. I just wanted to clarify. I'd love to have that credit of the Tongan experience. But so 6.5 years ago, I started at Western Oregon University and came mostly from a career development background, but they added the service learning piece to our department at that point. And basically, it was a clean slate. And they said, go. And I'm like, okay, how are we going to do this? And started a couple different things. One was to go to a conference in Chicago with a couple different faculty members. And at that conference, we actually transformed a syllabus from non-service learning to the service learning piece. And it was a health planning class. And prior, they had the students get in small groups and create imaginary projects, creating brochures for an imaginary agency and other things that didn't necessarily connect with the real world. And so it was real easy then to say, okay, let's add some community partners to this piece and put some of the reality and the service learning components into the syllabus. And that class is still going today, and the model is the students break up into small groups and they each have a community partner they're working with, and they are the ones that connect with the community partner to create the service activities that relate then to the class. For example, they work with United Communities Against Meth, UCAM. And with that partner has been for the last 6 years the same individual on the agency side, and the students meet with that agency partner and come up with a common service learning project together that then they meet with a community partner on a regular basis. They're in class and learn the class content. And then at the end of the course, there's actually a celebration with all the community partners, and the students give a presentation on what they did with those community partners throughout the course in that way. Another thing that I did with that particular professor is we visited Stanford University and University of Utah, who are known for their service learning pedagogy and content. And it was the best money I spent ever on continuing education, because we didn't go to conference sessions. We interviewed faculty, we interviewed the administrative side of things, we interviewed students, we observed classes in both of those places so that we could learn service learning firsthand and integrate those concepts into our courses at Western Oregon University. Another component that has taken off was the alternative break program, which started out with one group going to Habitat for Humanity build over the service break. And that was one trip. We used those students as student leaders for the following year. That was 4 trips, and now we're up to 6 or 8 trips depending on the year. One of the things we did last summer was do a more service learning trip component, where we partnered with a faculty from the German language department, and we partnered with a faculty from the sociology department, and we teamed up with a university in Germany, Ludwigsburg University, and we did a common service learning trip to the Munzingen area of Germany, and our students studied immigration issues here, and the German students studied the immigration issues there, and we Skyped. Every month we had a Skype interaction so that the students were sharing their data that they collected, and then our group went to Germany last summer and actually worked with the immigrant population in a couple of schools in Germany there. This next July we have a trip to Tanzania that is partnering with one of our state legislatures and a nonprofit agency, and again the same professor of German, and we are going on a service learning project in Tanzania this summer to focus on really the infrastructure of nonprofit and how to use political leverage to start nonprofit agencies and to make those effective not only here but in the countries you're going to.
Next, I will introduce Jess Lamb, and I'll stay very close to the name so I maybe don't misintroduce you. Jess grew up in northern Vermont, and the reason I want to bring this up is I loved your comment that in many of our communities we would never, ever think to use the word service because it might sound self-congratulatory. Sometimes it is just a way of life and a way of being in community. So I thought that was really an interesting piece that you shared with us in your bio. As you mentioned, you are a professor, a poet, and you teach upper-level composition, creative writing, and literature courses at Portland Community College's Southeast Center. And you are in the position of the Service Learning Faculty Coordinator at the Southeast Center, and this is a 2-year term, is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. So if you would share your experience with us. Thanks, Jess.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I really enjoy talking about service learning. I am just winding up my 2-year term as the faculty coordinator at the Southeast Center, which is our smallest campus. We have 4 campuses. It's a very international campus. We have a lot of students from all over the world, many of them fairly recent immigrants, Ukrainian, Somalian, Afghan, a lot of Vietnamese, you name it. So I learned about service learning just a couple years ago, actually, and thought, wow, there's a name for what I like to do with my classes. Maybe some of you have had that kind of excitement too, and realizing that it's a wonderful way to actually engage your students in you know, what so often happens, at least in writing classes, is they're learning how to write persuasively, and we ask them to get excited about some topic that they're not actually excited about. But when you introduce service learning, they can follow their own actually the real world problems in their neighborhoods and their communities, and learn more about them. So what I've done in my 2 levels of writing classes is in one class, I offer it as an option. In another class, the entire student body is involved in identifying some problem in their communities that they would like to change, to address at least, over the course of a term. And a term is fairly short, it's only 10 or 11 weeks, so it's pretty accelerated, and by the end of the experience, many of them have not achieved success. It's not about, actually, I don't tell them this at the beginning, but it's not about success. It's about learning what the power structures are in our state, in our city, and beginning to get a sense of how writing can be powerful in getting what you want. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that class, but I've also worked with instructors in all disciplines, and I really, in some ways service learning fits in very obviously to a writing or a literature class, but in my experience, it fits in very well with classes of any discipline, whether they are math or biology or psychology, whatever you name it. I think what I'll speak to just briefly is the difference between offering service learning as a kind of add-on or option for students, which is, I think, better than nothing, and the option of having it be really embedded in the class so that you're designing a whole course, a whole curriculum around service learning. And I've seen the pros and cons of both of those things. In my class, Writing 122, upper level composition class, we do a project called Writing in Action, where, as I said, all the students have, working in small groups, identified something they want to change in their communities. And some of the things they've worked on include there's often a group that wants to install a stoplight. We're right next to 82nd Avenue, and there's always students running across the street to the coffee shop, and many students have tried to install a pedestrian stoplight either on Division or on 82nd. A lot of students concerned about homelessness. Those are just a few of the projects. I had a group last term who lived in North Portland and was really worried about the escalation in gang violence. So they start out the term with an idea for a project, and then they do some research. And research is a really important component, I think, of service. Knowing what some of the critical issues are before you go in to do your service. I think research is actually almost as important as reflection. So you're prepared, and so that when you go into doing the service, you don't just kind of revisit your own stereotypes and assumptions. And then one of the things we do early on is create kind of a power map. How are decisions made about these issues? I always ask the students who are the representatives, who's the governor? 3 or 4 students usually know who the governor of Oregon is. And by the end of the term, they all know who their city commissioners are and their representatives. So learning how to manipulate, how to really get out there and work with the power structures, and how to use writing to change those structures. Maybe I'll just tell one story about as I said, success is not so much the experience by the end of the term, but I did have, there's always stories about change that happens, and one of my students was an Afghan young woman, had come to this country with her new husband, and was very, as many Muslim women are, very isolated from power, from doing things out in the world. But she was taking classes, and the most amazing thing for her in the course of the term was that She sent a letter. She put a stamp on an envelope. And in her reflection at the end of the term, she wrote about just how powerful that was for her to put a stamp on a letter. And her husband thought that this was very silly and didn't give her a lot of encouragement, but she just felt really very proud of herself. So I can tell more stories later if we have time, but that will do for now.
And the power of story is very important in service learning, so I hope that we can share stories here on the panel, as well as people in the audience that might have a story about some success in service embedded in their classes. And next we have Scott, and he was also born and raised an Oregonian, and discovered the value of service at the age of 10. So I think that's, you have many years working with this as well. His calling to pursue a career as an educator within the field of student affairs, specifically service learning, was really through all of these various experiences since you were a child. And his first professional calling led him to his first AmeriCorps Vista position at Concordia University in Portland. And he now works with service learning to enhance the student success rates of all students at Concordia University through their higher levels of academic engagement and involvement. So Scott, welcome.
Thank you. I was very excited actually to be a part of this panel this morning. A lot of times, even in our conversations with Oregon Campus Compact, and I think even the exciting conversation of building capacity for what service learning can be on a really powerful tool on university and campuses across Oregon has been really just an ongoing story in my personal and professional life. As mentioned at 10, I had my first experience, and I remember this being a pretty important piece of who I was and growing up as part of a life structure for me. My family and I took our first trip to serve the homeless as a family, and I remember asking very integral questions and not understanding poverty, not understanding the concept of how certain individuals can be in a situation where they're, for them, there's no hope. Situations where what can be done? These critical questions, even as a young child, asking those questions now and now realizing as a service learning professional that my professional career is wrapped up in helping our university students realize those same questions, and now that call to action. In my role at Concordia University, I'm the assistant director for service learning and have the privilege of working with multiple departments and multiple faculty in developing curriculum that does that very thing, asking our students to critically think, critically reason about the issues they want to address. And we, as a part of our first year experience course, one of my favorite questions to ask as the very first day is, what are you passionate about? What it is, why are you here receiving an education of higher education, and what do you hope to accomplish? And I think a lot of the conversations of students look like deer in the headlights. My mom and dad told me to come here, things like that. And I think after they get a chance to really conceptualize what those passions are through their experience in college, it's exciting to see how the service learning courses help them to engage and feel enriched throughout their academic experiences. They feel a deeper sense of calling and commitment to wanting to have an education that will do something when they finish. For me, that's enough motivation to get out of bed and understand that all of the curriculum that we create and all of the hard questions about how do we do this well and what does success look like, sometimes it's as powerful as a story of success. An individual change in a student's life where they had no expectations going into a service experience. And when they come out, they are completely different. They are someone who has a calling, who maybe shifts into a different major because of these experiences. I come from maybe the co-curricular side of it a little bit more as opposed to the academia side, but I can tell you that both are very enriching experiences. Both hold very valuable opportunities for our students to be motivated, to be people who don't just graduate, but do something extraordinary when they leave. And so from my point of view, with all of the service programs that Concordia offers, we run alternative break programs, similarly to most other universities. We now have just launched, with the help of State Farm Insurance, a very major retention project initiative called the Student Service Corps programs that is actually, with big audacious goals as they are, hoping to reduce the gang gang and prevalence to at-risk youth of them joining gangs by 50% in over a 3-year span. We are heavily involved in Northeast Portland with a lot of the Portland public schools, K through 8, and as well as high schools now, where our students are very passionate about being able to take this education and seeing it come to action. We feel very privileged at Concordia that the model of service learning that we have created with successful faculty partnerships to create courses that enhance how we engage the community. This model is now going to be hopefully something for the rest of the 8 other Concordia University systems across the nation. We feel that our program holds a lot of value for the kind of enriched experiences that our students are getting, and we know that students from any other university would be really privileged to have. I think overall for our program and what we're most proud of is we'd love to say that it was the staff that really took initiative, the staff of 2 of us in our office that were setting the tone for nationwide initiatives. But really the best part is that all we are is a conduit for all of our students and their passions to be able to accomplish what they want to do. They come to us, they breathe life into our program, and through those brilliant ideas we see incredible community engagement. We see so many different rates of success in how we enhance what nonprofits with incredible organizations are already doing. For me, community partnerships are vital to how service learning works. If we're not able to enhance the community we live in, then it's almost going backwards. How do we find those key stakeholders, those community partners that really are looking for maybe the muscle, maybe for new innovative ideas to enhance how they engage the community and how our university students can do the same thing. I feel privileged that it's a natural fit. The idea that our students are able to not just leave knowing that they completed service, but had an incredible experience being able to engage their passions into their own academic experience as well.
I do think it's very important. Universities, institutions of higher learning can definitely help set up those partnerships. I'm also finding for myself that many students are already involved in their communities in interesting ways, and they can actually also help us build those partnerships. So I'm glad that you brought up the passion of the students. Is very much a very important component of service learning. Next we have Greg Dardis, who is a Marylhurst instructor, and a lot of Greg's service learning experience actually comes from classes that he has taught in the past at Portland State University. And Greg is in the science, do you do math too?
Try not to.
Okay.
But yeah.
In the science department, we'll leave it at that. And he firmly believes that service learning is successful when it becomes a part of the fabric of the institution, which we're certainly striving to do here at Marylhurst. And when the students can see practical benefits, this practical application, professional, academic, and personal. And Greg will be testing this service learning approach in one of his 300-level environmental science classes this summer.
Thank you. My experience in service learning, I think, is probably like many of us here, where in some respects it's been unintentional in the past and it's being slowly formalized and made intentional. It was sort of thrust upon me when I started teaching at Portland State. At Portland State, there's a program called community-based learning. It's a little bit of a slightly different name than service-based learning. And it's a requirement for students that go to Portland State, in which it's sort of a liberal arts aspect of putting a liberal arts focus onto a large institutional public university. And there, I was able to experience it both as a graduate student and as an instructor. So I kind of I've seen sort of both sides to it. I've seen being a part of it without having a clue as to what it was supposed to be about. Because as you might imagine, in a very large university, it's sort of difficult to have an entire institutional sort of awareness and community in some respects. In a smaller place like Marylhurst, it would be quite a bit of a different program. At Portland State, basically the idea would be you'd be taking a regular class and they would add 1 extra credit to it. So you'd take a 3-credit class. The classes would be political science or environmental science or something like that. And then you'd be required to volunteer for 10 to 30 hours a week in the community for that extra credit. that ended up being kind of difficult to describe to students. And it's one model, quite a bit different than maybe other models. But the way I likened it to especially students who may not have understood what the point of it was, as if you're taking a biology class, you'd have a biology lab associated with it. You learn all the theory in one place, and then you go and actually dissect some poor little critter in another place. And that practical aspect is the practice of somehow the theory that you've talked about in the lecture. Well, in the same classes that I'm teaching at Portland State, I teach a leadership class and a global political ecology class and a new agrarianism class. All of those have this requirement for this extra 4th credit. And so the way I describe to the students is, what would it be like to have a lab in political ecology or environmental science in a real-world experience, as opposed to just being in a lab doing something. And so after they sort of get that idea, they start to realize that, you know, and in some respects, Portland State thinks about Portland as its laboratory. The motto for Portland State is "Let knowledge serve the city." And so for those who still aren't sure why they're doing this, I tell them, well, because the taxpayers want you to go out and volunteer for them, because they pay for some of your education as well. And after all of that, because everybody, especially in a introductory, maybe sophomore level class at Portland State, there's tons of people from all sort of backgrounds. It sort of evolves that there's this service learning aspect throughout the class as we talk about it. So in some respects, almost in spite of itself, there are, even if you don't have your institution, you know, every single person involved or on the same page, it's sort of a natural evolution that people will want to be involved and will see themselves as part of a society as well as part of whatever class they're taking. One of the things that I try to bring up in most of the classes is going to school is both a transactional thing as well as a transformational thing. And I'm sure we all talk about this in classrooms in some sort of aspect. They come to class, they get a grade. There's this transaction that goes on, and then hopefully there's also a transformational aspect. The idea of community building or service learning is in some way an embodiment of the transformational part that becomes very difficult as an instructor to be able to grade, for one thing. But it's something that you don't necessarily have to grade if the students buy into the fact, and the rest of the faculty and you as an instructor buy into the fact that that's supposed to be the transformational aspect of the class. And transforming into what, that could be different for every student that takes place in the class. In some respects, then, the challenges, and I'm not sure if we'll have time to get into the challenges in particular, but the idea of how much do you put time and effort into the classroom away from the subject you're talking about. As I teach mostly science classes, you know, at what point is it more important for me to spend time talking about community than about mitochondria? At some point you have to decide that, and decide that that question is also not going to be on the final exam perhaps, or in the final paper. At Portland State, it's kind of nice having that extra 4th credit to be able to say, okay, to the student, 3 credits are the science, 1 credit is this transformational experience where you're going to use the information from this class and help the community. And at least that gives me sort of a way of creating an economy within the class of their time and all of that, and the grading. It'll be interesting to see in a different situation, because I've never taught a service learning component within the framework of a regular 3-credit class where it's actually embedded in everything that we do. You would think that environmental science classes might have that embedded, but it's not always the case. So couple of the challenges is, how do you time manage those kinds of things? How do you grade students? Because there is still going to be the transaction of giving them a grade, no matter how transformative the experience has been. And then you have this idea of what, how does that fit into the rest of the curriculum? At Portland State, whether it's totally voluntary or not, which it isn't, they end up, most students take several classes in a row that has this CBL or community-based learning component to it. So by the time they actually graduate from Portland State, they've encountered this so many times that it becomes sort of second nature. The other thing, of course, is that students now, at least traditionally aged students, have been doing service learning in high school. So they've kind of come into the program sort of ready to go in that respect. Those who haven't, it's kind of interesting because you can see that pretty quickly at the beginning of a class as to how much of the student is kind of glazed over and how much are kind of ready to go. That then brings up maybe the last challenge is how do instructors who have a particular focus or content also become really good service learning instructors as well? Is there a training that goes into that? Does the whole university decide, what does service learning mean? Whose definitions do you use? What are the expectations? Just like in some respects, every other content area, there's going to be best practices evolving somehow. As much as, again, it's a transactional versus transformational thing, how much do we feel as a community our service learning is, how does it evolve? When do we see that an institution or a group goes to different levels of community or different levels of service learning? And not to be sciencey and try to quantify that, it does kind of make a difference in expectations. For instructors as well as students, what does service learning mean? So it ends up being one of these things where you can't quantify it's qualifiable, but you, at some point, you hope the revelation takes place, the transformation takes place. It's definitely worth the effort. I'm sure everybody would probably agree. I guess one of the things that I think is interesting is the social aspect of service learning is probably changing much more rapidly than maybe we can imagine in some respects, just from the couple of years I've been teaching at Portland State. Social networking, social communications, Twittering, all that kind of stuff has really changed the way students view society as much as about service to that society or that community, that sense of community. And so, in a way, I feel that more than ever, students then now have to become partners in this because they're going to tell me where the next evolutionary step of service learning is, because they're going to get it tweeted to them and I'm not. And so I guess that's the exciting part. It's kind of, it's the part that is emergent, the part that me as an instructor have to realize I can't control it. I'm going to just kind of let part of this evolve, but then again I have to grade it. I really like the diagram that you had, Amanda, of kind of this spectrum, and I would like to spend some time at some point thinking about how do we go from volunteerism to real service learning in communities, because in a way that's all defined in so many different places, and we may not be spending enough time figuring out what the ultimate goal is and realizing that the goalposts are going to be moving constantly as we start to set up how much of a curriculum goes towards that. So that's a brief overview. Thank you.
I would like to take the opportunity to pose a question to you each, and I am putting you rather on the spot. I didn't warn them about this, but I think through what you said, this will be fairly easy, and Greg has already started this. Could you think about perhaps one or two of the greatest gifts of service learning, and this can be for yourself as an instructor or as administrator or what you've seen in the students, and then one or two of the more specific challenges, which Greg has already touched upon, and then we can open it up to the audience. So let's just do this popcorn fashion. Whoever would like to come forward with Greatest gift, greatest challenge.
The greatest gift I've seen is a transformation of students as they engage with their community partner and are in the experiential real world. They finally get the course content, that it didn't make sense in the textbook, it didn't make sense during the lecture, but when they applied that with the community partner, with the clients of the community partner, is when it touched them and they finally got the reality of the course content, and in this example specifically, kind of health promotion pieces in that way. In terms of some of our service learning trips, we are 65% first generation students at Western, and so a lot of them, this is the first time on an airplane. A lot of them is the first time outside of the state, and so that experience, along with then the hard work of engaging in the community, has been transformational for those students in that way. The biggest challenges I see are the communication between whatever partner you're working with in the service learning project and the expectations of the students, and that relationship really needs to be defined going in, and there needs to be goals. Why are we doing this? If a student doesn't pick up the connection between the course content and the service project, there's going to be a lot of questions, and I have some evaluations from a class in which many of the students are like, I didn't get why we went out and did this. It didn't connect with the course content. Others, it was very evident, and they got that in that way. The other challenge is it's a lot of work. We know the content that we teach in our courses. A lot of us have taught them over and over again, and to add this component is a lot of work. And so that is the reality and a big challenge. The payoff is big, but to integrate that can be challenging as well.
Well, I would say without any hesitation that the gift is really is that my classes feel much more participatory and collaborative, and that we all feel so isolated in different ways. Faculty isolated from one another, students isolated from one another. They go into class, they sit in rows, they don't necessarily interact. And my service learning classes are intensely interactive. They know each other really well. They meet outside of class. And there begins to be a sense that they are running the show. I'm not just standing up there telling them what they need to know. So for me, I feel like I'm in it with the students, and it's a collaboration. So in a sense, it feels like less work for me. And that doesn't at all mean that I'm sitting back and letting them learn whatever they learn, but it's much more collaborative and relieves that sense of isolation because they are working in their communities and really feeling like they have a stake, not only a stake, but some kind of roadmap to figure out how to create change, become advocates. And the challenging thing for me has been that there's always a moment at the beginning. Students are very excited that they might have some hope of creating a little bit of momentum in some direction that's important to them. There's always a point in the term where they start to freak out and they realize that, change really takes time. It's not one of those, one-season sitcoms. It's lifelong, and so what navigating that point where there's freak out is the challenging thing for me.
I agree. It's funny, one gift. Well, there seems to be multiple for me, but I think the one that I love is that, again, the relevancy. I think at some point students realize that it goes from theory to this is totally aligning with what I'm about, who I am, where I want to be. It's a conversation where I think students don't realize that potential until they finally get into the community. They don't realize the impact they can have until all of those terms that connect automatically, and I think that's what Michael was referring to. You get to a point where all of those theories now make sense, and I actually can utilize these tools to make positive change. The gift, I think, is the relevancy and also partnership, realizing that the students have a voice. I think sometimes we forget that among these community partnerships, students still feel like students. that the power they may not, whether or not they really receive that or not within the community to make change is relevant. When they finally have the opportunity to interact with that CEO of a nonprofit, or to hear the real relevant conversations within the community, students start to realize the potential they have in themselves to vision, to see what kind of change they could develop. Without that empowerment, I think it becomes a really, again, that disconnect between theory and then what am I really trying to accomplish out in the community. They're empowered. They're empowered to do some pretty amazing things. And for me, even in the classes I've instructed, students still impress me with the new innovative ideas on how to, address these issues we've always tried to address, and what's their new take on how to approach it. So the relevancy, the partnerships, challenge. I think a lot of times, I believe Greg referred to this earlier, is what do we define success, and specifically our definition of what service learning really is. Because the faculty may have a very different definition than the students. Students may have a more action-based understanding of what service learning is versus the academic side. And then also even administration at some point. The administration sees service learning as being able to do these specific things, and so you have three very important stakeholders that you have to navigate this really important conversation. I know I do this every day, so it's being very clear about what the definition of what you want serviced, either community-based learning or however you define it. Is the definition going to fulfill what the institution envisions as a positive interaction for what service learning is supposed to accomplish? Navigating those conversations can be very difficult. Not for any other reason except for the fact that maybe it's just difficult to nail down. The definition isn't concrete because it can look so many different ways. So.
Yeah, I would say to continue a little bit with that, the challenge of being a manager as opposed to being an instructor is kind of an interesting concept, and I appreciate being a science person, and even though I teach in the advanced online program, I've always kind of avoided business. I'm thinking, I'm going to be a science geek. I'm not going to be a business person because it's better for both of us if I don't. But by putting yourself in that position of management, of thinking about things in sort of, you almost kind of have to think socially, managerially as an instructor in this sort of situation. It becomes sort of a challenge. One of the challenges, I guess, that at Portland State that I've had is that when you have students who are working 30 hours a week or more, and you're asking them to volunteer, and you're asking them to become part of a community, and they already thought they were part of a community. They already thought they were servicing, the older students have families, the younger students can't afford school, so they have to be working. Here's this requirement. Well, what I did in a sophomore class, and it always amazes me how much more sophomore students do than I did as a sophomore, and how much they're involved in a bunch of other things and having to deal with a lot of issues. The students who had to work too much to be able to volunteer, I said, okay, why don't you go ahead and use where you work as your service, which I'm not sure the administration maybe would agree with that, but I went ahead and kind of did that. It becomes kind of a challenge then. How do you manage everybody's, the expectations? Somebody's volunteering for the Red Cross, somebody's working at their father's auto dealership in Beaverton. And I guess the gift that came out of that challenge was specifically I did have a student who's working in his father's auto business. And I said, well, it's kind of interesting, I guess we'll say that that's a good service thing, but you're going to have to, as part of this class, the class is on leadership for change, and part of the class is to be thinking critically about the organization that you work for as a leader for change, not assuming that every place you volunteer for is the best thing in the world. So how do you critically think about whether that organization, whether that community is really demonstrating maybe good leadership or whatever, trying to get the content in. Well, this one student had to spend a bunch of time thinking about his dad as a leader for change. His dad is part of the community. And so there can be a lot of things that get triggered. And that final paper was really amazing. He, for the first time, was able to see his parent as a person who led in the community and not somebody telling him to go stack the tires, you know, every Saturday. So it's challenging in that way, but I guess some of the rewards are that if you're able to let go a little bit, if you're able to write the rubrics for grading the right way, so everybody feels like everything's not totally subjective, then you can see amazing stuff happen. And it's not necessarily that society is going to be better, but maybe the student has a better relationship with just a few people, as opposed to thinking society is going to be changed by everybody doing these kinds of things. And that's sort of a different way of viewing education than probably thinking about when we first started in a course like as simple as that.
Thank you. Well, and that's why everyone is here, to think about the challenges of integrating service learning into your courses, as well as the gifts. And so I'd like to open it up to the audience. And should I be running the mic around for you guys? Sure. Okay. So, okay, Amanda. Thank you.
So I feel like I've heard a lot about sort of this idea of service, what they might be doing to engage in the community. I would like to hear a little bit more about, and I know there's maybe two types of courses we might be dealing with. One might be more discipline specific, where you're integrating service learning into a discipline specific course, or a general service learning course in which everyone comes in maybe from a different discipline and a different major and finds an organization to engage with. What is the course part like? So, for instance, what are the themes or the topics that you engage with students over the course of a term in relation to the service that they're doing? That would be my question.
Who wants to take it?
Maybe I'll just jump in, because most of my classes would be very content, so I'd be kind of on that end of the spectrum. And those kind of things have to then be very content field related. For learning leadership for change class, what is the theory of leadership, what's the theory of change, and can they see that in their community? Can they critically think about that? Can they communicate that? And so what I have, very specifically I guess, I have a Word document that has questions about how does their experience relate to concepts in the class, and how do they critically think that they would like to see their community change. So that requires them to think conceptually about the content, and then at the same time they have to integrate that information, synthesize it in a way, how would they improve it? It's kind of maybe more rigid than most other rubrics for service learning classes that are more general service learning. But the same thing will probably be true in environmental science. How, if you think of yourself in an ecological community, servicing people in that kind of context, if I can, it's kind of like putting people in, or putting ideas in little boxes, but if I can create a framework like that, then for me, it's not only just a little bit easier to grade, easier to show how it reflects the theory that I'm talking about, but then what's interesting is if you give people somewhat of a framework, then you can let the emergence happen, you can let new stuff happen, and you've already taken care of this part. So they can go off and find something new you never thought of, after you know that they've kind of gotten the idea of the content aspect of it. So it's a fairly formalized evaluation and description that I describe to the students in those kind of content sort of based ones first.
I remember one of the seminars I went to, and the example was the faculty members saying, okay, here's my course content. So they were going to a community partner and saying, I need this out of you, right? So no partnership there, but I need you to service me in this way, and I'm the expert because I'm the faculty and I know my content, and so let's have this partnership. And the important thing is to, if you are going to integrate service into your courses, is to have that conversation with partners that would on the surface seem to make sense, but what are their objectives out of this? And this, it might be hard to see, but there's this circle of you have your course content is primary one for whatever class you're teaching, right? That needs to come out. If you're adding the service component, that needs to overlap with the need of the community agency, and that's where the partnership is. And then out of that, your students doing reflection and hopefully impacting the content of the course in positive ways, and that's your objectives. But the agency needs to assess whether that service piece met their needs and met their objectives as part of it. And so it is this partnership as opposed to, okay, out of my course I need this, this, and this from these agencies, and to imply that we're the experts and this is the way you should run your agency for my class. And so that's an important piece that I've always remembered from this one seminar.
My question is for all the panelists. Greg alluded to the challenges associated with grading, with sort of quantifying student experience and grading at the end of the course. And I'm curious about whether the panelists have a few built-in, I mean, I'm assuming you must, but what are the go-to strategies, whether it's a final paper or journals along the way, what kinds of things have you used as tools to help students document their process?
Well, one thing I think it's important to keep in mind if you're doing service is that you're not assessing them on the service per se. You're assessing them on meeting the course outcomes, which involve doing the service. But you're not assessing their service. And what I always say to my students, and I've mentioned this a couple times in the beginning of the class, is that I'm not assessing them, evaluating them on the success of their project. Really what I'm assessing them on is their ability to look at the project and reflect on their role in it. You know, what did they learn about themselves as community members? What did they learn about their attitudes about change? What did they learn about what it takes to create change? And to think critically and maybe even notice some things that aren't pretty about themselves as members of a group, or about how social change works. So, you know, there's a lot said about assessment. I really think assessment, you assess them the way you would assess any class. And maybe that's glancing around the issue, but since you're not assessing the service learning, you're really just assessing, as you would any class, whether they meet the learning objectives of that class. And for me, it's a writing reflection, but it wouldn't have to be.
I agree. I think some of the more creative sides of how you are able to collect the assessment can be relevant. And we kind of maybe mentioned the social networking piece, but some of the things that I've used is video blogs where they can do it every week. You know, they give us a weekly update of how is it going, and it's almost, I hate to say almost, not real world, but like reality show where they go into a confession box, and tell how, the dirty secrets of service learning. But, but they get an opportunity to, but these have been really, really successful where we give a student a handheld, flip camera, video camera, and they get an opportunity to be on site and share exactly what the experience is, and again with guided conversation of how they speak to the community partner and things of that nature. We're very specific about what we expect in those particular assessments. We want them to speak to, again, what challenges are they facing? Are they able to critically reason new solutions to problems that the organization is already having? Things of that nature where, again, you can start to see the enriched critical thought that goes into these particular assessments on site. The more we found more success where the assessment that happens on site, the students have really enjoyed it, and it becomes way more enriched for them too. We've also realized that through the service partnership, a lot of the assessment that we'll do or outcomes that we share beforehand, so when the course is agreed upon between the community partner and the faculty member, the fact that we really look forward to the community or our main contact at the community partner to be a part of the assessment. So we asked them to give us, on-site assessments about how, what challenges do they see our own students facing, in their meetings and those conversations of, when we ask them to assess those outcomes that we've already created. Those have been great assessments. One, because it's very practical. I mean, they really look at it as an employee-employee relationship in the sense of, my own staff go through these issues, and it's very interesting to see how these students, as a collaborative group, are trying to address the same issues as my full-time staff, and how do they engage change from that point of view, and have turned into really great conversations, really good on-site assessment. But journals, video blogs, we've done some other kind of, I think, really maybe more meaningful assessment pieces. Students have done active role plays of what it was like to face the challenge. I mean, it's been great. So I think the neat part is the creativity in the assessment, especially with what we're asking them to display through what the interactions and the challenges they faced.
Thank you. I was just wondering, because what I've heard are some terrific examples of sort of project-based community style outreach and service learning. I teach in an accelerated ground program as well as an accelerated online program. What do you envision a service learning based project might look like in that model?
We're talking 5 weeks.
5 weeks, yes, yeah. Both ground and online.
And what is the course subject, or
well, currently I'm just beginning an accelerated MBA marketing, and then I also have a sustainability marketing, which I can see more application in the sustainability marketing program, where we talk about societal marketing and the impact that marketing has, but also in leadership, quality management, those kinds of courses.
We actually have addressed this, Bob Hanks from the business department, in our service learning task group. And one idea we came up with is that perhaps the service learning component perhaps is an overarching component in classes where students are likely to take one class and then the next class. So then it becomes not a 10-week because there's a break in between, but like an 11 or 12-week overarching process. We haven't come up with anything yet. So your question is very good, and I'm glad we have it taped. So we'll remember it. But that's one of the things we're doing. And I've also taught in I'm a recovering corporate. So I also have taught and developed classes for AOP, the Accelerated Online Program in Business Studies and Real Estate. And I know how quickly those go. But I think that if there could be a component where a student starts something and perhaps gets to move it further in another class, even if they slightly tweak it, that there might be some opportunity there. And those are 4-unit classes, right? So maybe there's one unit that is that piece of it. I shouldn't speak for the director of the business department. Yeah, and all of this, as we've mentioned, all of this takes a lot of coordination. So the challenge is designing it, but I also think the gift is once it's developed, it's really fun. It's really fun and very rewarding.
And one thing I'd say about the online aspect of it is, in a way, my experience at Portland State might be a little bit different because I never see the community partners because they're finding them on their own. I believe that they're volunteering or not. And they end up creating those connections in a way, so it's a little bit different. It might be similar, though, online. What the students themselves end up doing when they've had more than one of these classes in a row is that they learn real quick that they take 2 classes that require service learning and they do the same volunteering for 2 classes. One class may be asking, how does that reflect leadership? One may be asking, how does that reflect sustainability? And they can do that. So they do their own management. They figure out what classes do that. Online, it's possible, I would imagine, that the same sort of thing could happen where you're not going to be going to where somebody in Maryland happens to be taking an online class to see if they're going to do service learning. But something will emerge if they know they're going to be doing 4 classes in a row. All 4 require service learning. They'll probably pick some place that would reflect all of those. So that's one of those things where you kind of don't manage too much, and you have to hope that how you assess them, you can get that out of whatever techniques you have for assessment online anyway. So I think that's part of where it helps, at least for a Portland State, to have the expectation that everybody takes all of these classes that have a CBL component or a service learning component, and then it creates the expectation that the students then manage themselves on that.
Most of the students we're working with have community connections already, and they're involved in organizations. And the other thing is it does not have to be complex. It can be one simple question where you're going out and connecting with that community partner and learning something and applying it. It doesn't have to be a 5-week integration. Every week you do this and you change the world at this organization. It can be less simple and very short term and still be meaningful for the class content and the student and you as the instructor.
Yeah, I would say that, agree really quick with that, is that we're having this conversation at Concordia about how do we really engage online graduate students, especially since they are full-time people. So how do we do that? And I would totally agree with that, is that what we've learned is over time, no matter even in that 5-week period, is that they already have a lot of the theory down. They're already practicing that already. So if they're already engaged and enriched with that first foundational piece, a lot of what they're doing, or like we found, 25% of our students are working in, Title I, maybe schools right now with student teaching or doing those particular programs or substituting. Well, they're in a great location to do the service that's already happening. And so I guess I would agree that not reinventing the wheel would be really critical to how you engage or integrate that service component.
I'm sitting here and I'd like to play the devil's advocate for a moment. If I was a businessman or an administrator or just a taxpayer, you're talking about a pie-in-the-sky thing that takes a lot of time, and time is money. Mm-hmm. Who in the world is paying for this? You're asking me to pay for this. Is it worth it? Do I get my money's worth out of it? I haven't heard much.
Let me play devil's advocate in responding to the question in regards to, isn't that what tuition is? Mm-hmm. They're paying, and what are they getting in return on that? And that's the value of the content of our courses. And if the service is added to the content of the courses, that's the return on investment. You put time into your papers, you put time into your studying, you put time into engaging in class, and that's the same question. Am I getting my return on investment with my tuition? And I would say the service learning it enhances that return on investment because you are learning better and more in depth.
But the tuition is not the only money going into the school, paying the bill. My taxes are, and I'm just playing this devil's advocate. Yeah. And I've heard people just froth at the mouth about extras like this. And they say, come on, guys, you haven't proved it to me yet, that it's worth it. And I personally think it is. But we're doing a terrible job of PR around this issue because they're not getting the message at all.
Well, it's tricky enough as an instructor to be able to assess 30 students and what they do, much less the average person reading in the newspaper assessing the school about what it does. So that'll probably take decades before these students become the taxpayer that actually makes that decision about whether it's a good idea or not. I think it's a fairly large social issue as to what is it worthwhile for every medical student to have to dissect a frog? Even as every aspect of it is something that is a Lego block that builds a life, a career, a community. And this may be one of the more ambiguous ones to quantify, maybe one of the more difficult ones to say this amount of money gets you this amount of community or service, thinking of it economically like that. But at some point, we have to do a good job of saying that, is it a terminal goal to have really good citizens and a really good community, or is it a terminal goal to make sure there's a one-to-one ratio of transaction of money and credits to something that person will eventually be part of the community? It sort of makes sense that they're part of the community while they're learning as opposed to waiting until after they graduate. Yeah.
There's a large PR component to this as well, and that might not come down to our personal responsibilities. But in terms of, we've gotten some good publicity out in the community of here's how we're making a difference and connecting it to the course content. And so there is added value and a perception, at least in the community I'm in, that what our department is doing in service learning is value added. I wish we had more of that. I wish we had exposure in the Portland metro area, all of those things. We wish we had more. But I know at least in Monmouth Independence, we've built that credibility. It's taken time, but that's an important piece for the university itself to take a look at.
There aren't very many studies. I'd like to see more. I also teach at a graduate institute. I'd like to see some dissertations on this kind of work. There's a very high percentage of students who, when they have service learning and they integrate community service into their curriculum, I know for myself, I've been teaching in the Bay Area, online now, for over 10 years, a class every semester. I call it community-based learning there. 75 to 80% of my students, even if they have never volunteered before, continue to volunteer. And so I think that it's incumbent upon all of us to continually bring up, we are building world citizens. We are building contributing members to our community who are invested in our communities. Even if they're visiting a college, many people when they attend college end up living in that community when they graduate. So I think it's really incumbent upon all of us to continually say, yes, we are building contributing members to our society in really deep and broad ways. And they most likely will continue to contribute and volunteer. And that's a payback that I don't think we can put any price on. That's priceless.
This is an observation, and possibly there are people in the room who have noticed the public service announcement or ad that University of Portland is featuring. The copy is pretty insightful about, and it kind of skirts Roger's devil's advocacy question, because the University of Portland obviously is an institution, a private institution, has doesn't have to worry about the taxpayer's dollar. But how many have seen that commercial where if you send your kid to the University of Portland, you're training them to give back to the community? And their four-letter word, RISE, embodies that community service aspect. Anyway, I think if you take note of it the next time it airs on basic television, I wish I had some feedback here. People obviously have not seen it, but it raises this invitation to get involved in service learning as part of the curriculum.
I also want to bounce off of the devil's advocate question. For the last 27 years or so, my primary job has been in the nonprofit field. So I'm sitting here kind of foaming at the mouth thinking, tell me where to sign up, you know, what's the next step? I'm ready. I know that there's so much potential. I feel it mostly in my stomach about how this is just an obvious connection for the nonprofit world. And most of my students here at Marylhurst, and now starting at Pacific University as well, where I also teach, are starting to know that and come to me saying, you know, I want to connect with the nonprofit field, and you seem connected there. Because I'm also a consultant for nonprofits all over the Pacific Northwest. So I'm just hoping that out of this meeting today and all the other work that's being done behind the scenes to kick this off here at Marylhurst, is that there will be a step-by-step instructional manual of some sort that says, here's how to plug in, because I'm ready. And the nonprofit world is, it's been around for a long time and always will be here, and is a much bigger sector than most people realize, and we're always trying to connect in this way, and it's such a tremendous need. I can't possibly do justice to it, you know, here on the microphone right now, but I do hope to know exactly where to you know, how to take the next step. Thank you.
Can I speak to that?
Yeah, please.
I'd love to speak to that, because we really are taking baby steps here at Marylhurst for this. One of the things we will develop is kind of a you know, the ABCs of service learning. But what we do have is we have Amanda, and so we have and we have Oregon Campus Compact as a partner, and so we have a lot of sample syllabi, and we have a consultant who is meeting with faculty one-on-one to help them think about what this would look like in their class. And as we continue to kind of build our internal capacity and work with the Marylhurst faculty who are already doing this, Greg and Susan among several others, you know, we'll start to develop an internal network of experts too that can be resources for faculty who want to try it out, either by dipping their toe in the pool of service learning or by jumping all the way in. And but we do really have in Amanda, in our Vista member, a one-on-one consultant that is working with faculty to really think about the best way to ensure that the content piece and the assessment piece is met, but also to think about what the needs are, as Michael talked about, and Jessica too, what the needs are of the communities, of either the nonprofit agencies or so that there really is one of, that principle of the 6 principles is that the community identifies the need, and it's not a group of students who say, oh, here's what we're going to do to fix you. That it's really that partnership piece that Michael talked about. So we're building it brick by brick, stone by stone, and I think that if you're ready to go, the first thing to do is to let Amanda know you're ready to go, and she'll take you there. I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on that.
You don't have not every class has to do everything. So it's okay if an institution has sort of layers of involvement, layers of whatever. Sophomores don't have to do everything that a senior does or a grad student does. And if a university has a system where there's a capstone, this particularly fits into that. That's how Portland State goes about it, where you start doing these different things, and as teaching sophomores, I don't have to tell them everything about service learning because I know they're going to have 3 more years of it. And I think a lot of instructors feel like they have to do everything, and they're not part of a community because they have to do all the grading, and they don't have the community grading them, grading papers. They're grading papers. And so it's one of those things where if the institution has enough time to make those discussions and talks to the partners, and the partners say, how things are going, and the instructors know that they're just part of the students traveling, the narrative that they're kind of creating. By the time they leave, hopefully they've gotten to some point that you can say, yes, you've done this, and people from the outside will say, yes, that makes a Marylhurst degree worthwhile, or I will hire that Portland State person because I know they did that. That'll eventually either take care of itself or not, and the institutions that can't do that well probably won't do quite so well. But that's the process aspect of it. It's not going to be done just by having it written down.
I think one thing that can be frustrating for community partners doing service learning is you get excited about it and think I'm going to have this steady stream of students coming to my organization, and it really doesn't work out that way. It's kind of up and down, and even though many of my students do continue doing their service after the course is over, many don't. So I think what I've noticed over these last few years of working closely with partners who are specifically in the neighborhood of my school is that it works out best if there is a close relationship, ongoing relationship between a few faculty and that organization. And so I don't encourage people to turn their students loose out into the wider Portland area where there are 11,000 nonprofits, literally, and choose whichever one you like. I make sure I've talked closely with a couple of organizations before I let my students loose, and I direct them towards those specific organizations. So.
To play off that, that's one thing with the community partner piece, and maybe it goes back to devil advocacy, is that a lot of my phone calls that come to my office are community partners saying, well, I've seen multiple students from different universities, but they're there for 10 hours. And that's where the cost of this complete partnership has to be. We have to be very sensitive to how we create these partnerships. Example would be in our memorandum of understandings as these go out, that's part of it, is that we've agreed to the kind of, it's either a 6-month or a year-long partnership. The most dangerous way to destroy any community partnership is to offer very part-time snippets of service where students go into these organizations, and it does cost these nonprofits a ton of time. They are struggling as it is, and so I think maybe the gift out of that would be potentially is how do we figure that out? How do our students become really a help and not a hindrance in the kind of service they're trying to produce? Because I know I deal with that on a very often basis, is that we're very careful what kind of partnerships we ask our faculty to find. Because if we can't supply that so that it is a win-win for them, it becomes a very hard process after that. So I thought that was an interesting note.
Actually, more of a statement than a question, but getting back to what many of you have said is that, and looking at a perspective from a for-profit business person, so much of business is driven by relationships. And the opportunity here for our students and faculty to develop these relationships with the business community enhances this so much more, because it helps begin to identify students who are creative, innovative. And if I'm a business person, I want to try and find those people that I can bring into my organization in the future upon graduation that helps move my organization forward. And that's the value added that you can get through a program like this. It goes beyond the actual service. So.
And that's why they integrated the service learning and career development into our office, because they do go hand in hand, and it works both ways for the students who find out their career paths through the service learning. But then also, you're right, I can work for nonprofit, and they get their jobs through their in-class participation. Yeah.